Hello everybody, welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and today we're going to be doing an in-depth guide for Diana Mid. So special thanks to Smokey for donating for this video. I really appreciate it. If you'd like to donate for a guide yourself, it's just $30. Just email me at thestrategyprofessor@gmail.com. Let me know what you have in mind. We can probably set that up. If you're a channel member, either through YouTube or through the PayPal option, then it's $5 off, so it's only $25 for a guide. And check out the rest of the content on the channel as well. We have tons of tier lists, other champion guides, coaching sessions, just tons and tons of stuff. And we stream every night on YouTube starting around 10:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We go till about 10:30 p.m. till 2:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So come on by. It's a lot of fun. And if you are a member, every Sunday I do try to play some games with members as well, just so you can get in there, play some games with the content creator, help build up the community a little bit. So that's a good time for anyone that's a member, an extra perk that I've tried to throw in there. Okay, let's go ahead and get in here. Now, you can watch my videos also at like 1.5 or 2x speed as well. I know I'm from the South. I speak a little slower than some other places around the world, and they do tend to be in-depth, and it's, unscripted. So, feel free to watch it faster. And I'll also put some timestamps in the description so you can jump around to your favorite parts as well. Okay, let me preface this by just coming out and saying I'm not a mid main. I'm not a Diana main. I've been as high as a D3 support in recent months. And so that's kind of my wheelhouse. But I have played against Diana a lot, and I did do quite a bit of research, and I have several resources we'll be talking about on kind of the left or the right of the split screen here. Then I have this Google Doc on the left that kind of gives you the cheat sheet of what I'm going to be talking about as well. So just keep that in mind. If you know any tips that I don't mention or you have any ideas that I don't mention in here, then definitely let us know in the comments. I'm sure everyone would love to hear it. And, it's a pretty low-budget production, as people can tell. There's not going to be a lot of tight editing and, like crazy outplay, gameplay clips in the background. I just don't have the budget for that. A lot of those things would be like 6 hours and very good editing knowledge. And you have to go out and get the gameplay footage and all that stuff. I just can't run on that kind of budget for $30. On a video, it's probably going to get like 500 views. I just can't spend 6 hours on a guide. So I'm going to do the best that I can. I spent about an hour researching it, and this guide will probably be 30 minutes to an hour. So this is going to be kind of the more in-depth, talking about the statistical side, the placement in the meta, different itemization, and the pros and cons of that. So it's got a lot of stuff you won't find in other guides, but it's not going to, like I said, be that tight edited sort of guide. Just because I don't have the time or the skills or the money to throw that together. So I just do the best that I can. Okay, let's go ahead and get in here, though. Let's start with her abilities and just kind of break down what is it about Diana, what makes her unique compared to some other champions, what are her strengths, what are her weaknesses, and then we'll get in a little bit more to some of the different runes and itemization choices, and then we'll finish off with talking about some of her laning tips and tricks using the Rift Planner here, and I'll walk you through some different scenarios and how you might respond to them. Okay, so she's kind of a blend of like a fighter. Like, she's called an assassin, but she does have some defensive tools that many assassins don't. So she's got a shield on her W, and she has pretty high base health. I think for a lot of assassins, she's got almost 600 health, so that's quite a lot. I mean, that's almost in tank territory as far as the health goes, and she has pretty decent health regen as well. Now, her armor and magic resist are on the low side, but she also does have pretty high movement speeds. Her base stats are okay. She did just recently get nerfed down a little bit to on her base mana to 375, but we've got some builds that can help you out with that. Shouldn't be too big of a deal. Maybe your first, back, you might be running out of mana a bit early on, but I think that's not going to hit her too hard. And she's in a good place overall in the meta. We'll talk about her place in the meta a little bit more in a bit, but she does have about a 53% win rate in the mid lane, and she is picked fairly often, so about 9%. So she is doing very well right now. So she's tanky-ish, and she can put out really high sustained damage because she gets bonuses to her attack speed off of this Moon Silver Blade, and she can also do high burst damage. So she's pretty versatile in a lot of different situations. So she permanently gains 10 to 40% bonus attack speed, so that means that any sort of on-head effects, any sort of attack speed modifiers are going to be pretty strong on her. And then after she casts an ability, then it's tripled to 30% to 120%, and then her basic attacks grant a stack for 3.5 seconds, and at 2 stacks, her next basic attack deals on hit and cleaves nearby enemies, consuming all the stacks. So basically every third attack, then she's going to do bonus damage. That's kind of standard on a lot of different like melee type of on hit champions. Now, it doesn't have to be on the same target, I don't believe. So you could stack this up on a minion wave before you go in for your first hit and get that immediate burst and then go for there. So it looks like it doesn't have to be on the same target. And there is no cooldown. So you can just keep applying this to the same person every third attack. So you can prep it on the wave, start your trade, and then just every time you get a third attack after that, then you're going to do this extra damage, which is pretty nice. It does cleave, so it can do damage in fights, like in team fights. Now, they're going to have to really be clumped up for that. Your ultimate does pull people together, so there's a good chance you could get at least one of those off where you're hitting multiple targets, but that does help you out with your wave clear if you can, clump the minions around you and start proccing this Moon Silver Blade. So attack speed's going to be a really good stat on her, and we'll see that with her itemization here in just a little bit. It does have a 0.4 ratio, which is not insane. It's okay. It's not Echo-esque whenever he trips his passive, but it does give the extra per level hit. So in the mid game, you'll get around like 90 around level 9 or so. 90 extra damage on that hit, which is really nice. Okay, then she's got Counter Strike, which is her Q. You always want to max this first. This is going to be your wave clear, and it's also going to be your way to reset your E, which does pretty decent damage and serves as your gap closer, your ability to stick to people as you don't get kited as much. So she throws it in this weird, like, crescent-shaped skill shot. So you have to get used to that as far as, like, whenever you're trying to hit multiple people or you're trying to hit multiple minions. You have to align yourself. And I think it always goes on the right side. I'm not 100%. Once again, I'm not a Diana main. But you want to make sure that arc's hitting as many minions as you can when you're lining it up, obviously, so you can do that damage. So the damage doesn't look like a ton. It caps out at 200 with a 0.7 ratio, but you got to keep in mind that it resets the cooldown on the Lunar Rush when you rush to somebody that has a mark on them. So basically, every time you hit them with one of these, then you're also going to get them with a Lunar Rush if you're playing it properly. So just go ahead and add on 40 damage. This is what you max last is your E. Just go ahead and add on 40 damage and a 0.4 ratio. So this is really like a 1.1 ratio with a 240 when it's capped out is the best way to think about it. So that actually is quite good, as you can see, a really nice AP ratio if you chain it together and think about it like that. It's a pretty good AP ratio. So decent wave clear, adds extra mobility, basically a free dash every 6 seconds. So that's going to be really solid. And then the Pale Cascade. Now, this is one thing that sets her, makes her a little bit different from some of the other assassins out there, like your Zeds, your Talons. I guess Echo, still has a shield, and then you've got Cassidon has his sort of shield. So there are some other ones with shields out there, but this one's really nice in that it scales off of bonus health and bonus AP, and it does damage all in one ability. So it's really nice. This can help you wave clear as well. So you have your passive to help you wave clear, then you have your Crescent Strike, and you have your Pale Cascade. So she does have really nice wave clear. That's one thing that sort of sets her up that's a bit different from something, especially like a Cassidon in earlier. Because I think Cassidon is one of the closest things to her in terms of high mobility, sort of burst champion that gets kind of tanky and is difficult to deal with later on in the game. Does pretty high sustained damage. But this is one thing that sets her up in the early game a lot better than him, is that Cassidon has virtually no wave clear. Like, he's got his E, which does some, I guess. But she's going to be much, much better at wave clearing. And wave clearing is such a huge deal. We'll talk about that more in the laning section, but it really sets you up to be able to rotate to get some of those assassinations in the bot lane, in the top lane. Allows you to help your jungler contest scuttles. Allows you to rotate for dragons or rift heralds in the early game. So having wave clear on an assassin is really, really nice and fairly rare. I think like Kiana has really good wave clear, and that's why she's played in pro a lot, is that she can get Moby boots and she wave clears a lot, so she applies a ton of pressure on the map. But Diana also has pretty decent wave clear early on. So she does get this shield. This is what you max out second. You get up to 180 shield, and it does 200 damage. So that right there is really strong. That's like a 380 trade, if you want to think about it in those terms, with the 180 shield and the 200 damage. Then it ends up with basically a 1.05, almost like a 1.0 AP ratio, which is nice. And it scales to 20% of your bonus health. So if you do go for something like a Rod of the Ages, which is very common with her, then you will get a nice bonus off of that, right? I think Rod's like 500 health, 300 health. No, when it stacks up all the way, though, it is 500. Yeah, so it's 500 when it stacks up. So it's like an extra 100 shield, which is, obviously going to be very, very nice. Um, so if you have some, like, good AP with that, then it's going to end up being, like, probably like a 400 or a 500 shield. If you take Revitalize, it would be even bigger. So, yeah, pretty nice ability. Great for trading. Great for those one-on-one all-ins against other assassins. And then, so you max that second. And then Lunar Rush is going to be the last thing that you max. And you basically dash to somebody. It's 825 range. This is a lot further than people think. You can get on people from a pretty far distance for just a point-click ability. But you want to try to hit them with the Moonlight proc first, because if you dash to somebody that has a Moonlight proc, it takes all of the procs off of everybody and resets your dash timer. So it's not like Irelia where everybody gets marked with an ability and then she just dashes around like over and over again. You only get one jump. Okay, so you got to pick your target carefully if you hit multiple targets with it, because it's going to erase all of the Moonlight procs whenever you do it. But it does give you a reset. So, and it has a pretty long cooldown, especially if you're not putting points in this, which you shouldn't. So you really do not want to use this unless you're getting the reset, unless you're going for the kill, right? So if they're really low, and then you can use the second one to go in for the kill. But by and large, you want to try to hold on to this, especially in team fights, so that you get a dash every 6 seconds until you start going for those kills. Or I guess it usually gets down to about 4 seconds once you get quite a bit of CDR. Because if you blow both of your dashes, you're going to have to wait. Like if you dash once to someone that has the Crescent Strike, Moonlight proc, and then you dash again to try to do more damage to someone else, then you're going to be sitting there waiting for the 22 seconds before you have any more dashes left. So, there's a little bit of planning there. Do you go for the double dash and try to kill someone immediately in a team fight, or do you kind of hang out and wait longer in the fight to maybe get 3 dashes off? And that also goes for 1v1s, right? Go in for a small trade with a Lunar Rush, jump on them, Pale Cascade, spam all your stuff, maybe do 50% of their health back up a little bit, wait till these are off cooldown, wait maybe 7 seconds with CDR, then go in and get the double dash for the kill. So there is a little bit of decision making going on there. But that does give her really good stickiness if you play it properly in fight. So she's difficult to get away from. And then Moonfall does quite a bit of damage as well. So per champion hit, it does extra up to 740 damage. Magic damage in an area around her increased for each champion pulled. So if you pull 3 champions in, then it could do, it's 60 per champion, do like an extra 180 per champion. So like at a level 11, you could do almost 500 damage with an extra, over 100% AP ratio, and it slows everybody for 2 seconds, non-decaying, which means you can stick with them, hit your Pale Cascade on everyone. Now, this thing does dealing magic to all enemies around her in a 200 radius. So when you pull all of them in, like we talked about with the Pale Cascade, this is 200 damage to everybody. So if you hit 3 people with this, it's 600 damage. And then the Moonlight can also do, damage to everybody hit. So she has a lot of AoE abilities. Now, this is only one person, so this doesn't do any sort of splash. But that allows her to serve as almost like a pretty decent engaged champion, especially if you go Rod of the Ages and Hourglass. You can hit Moonlight proc on someone in a team fight, dash in there, activate your Moonfall, pull everybody in, and then they all just get blasted. You activate your Pale Cascade and just go nuts with your Moon Silver Blade. Now, this, remember, does AoE as well. So this cleaves, and this can do massive AoE damage. So, 4 of her abilities do really big AoE damage. So that makes her, pretty strong in team fights as well, to just go in there, hit them with that big ult, big AoE damage, and then just auto-attack them down for the rest. So once again, that sort of sets her apart from Cassidon, who kind of has to hang out on the edges a lot and just wait for his moment to go in and pick someone off. Or someone like LeBlanc, who just waits on her cooldowns and just tries to go in and pick someone off. She could actually go in and all in these team fights and get a bunch of AoE damage to go off, which is really nice in the team fight meta that we're in right now, where you're seeing a ton of Rumbles, Jarvans, Misfortunes, a lot of stuff going on there. So, yeah, pretty flexible, pretty versatile, and it's on a low cooldown of only 100 seconds. This does allow you to go in for those kills. And if they don't, usually if you pull them in like that, and even if it's a one-on-one situation and they don't flash out, you're probably going to kill them. If you hit them with Cascade, because you can Cascade them, rush in, Moonfall, activate your, or Crescent Strike, or rather, activate your Pale Cascade. I guess you can even activate this before you go in. You can activate it while you're mid-dash, too, because you can cast spells mid-dash. So it's just going to do a ton of damage overall. So it just makes it very, very difficult for a lot of champions to trade with her because she's got the resilience and she has the pretty high burst and pretty high team fight capability. So it's a very strong champion right now overall. She's not being seen a ton in pro, but you are seeing her a little bit in pro. But yeah, so one of her, main identities is that she's very sticky with a low cooldown on her Crescent Strike, and she can do a ton of AoE damage and has some resilience to her, which, once again, positions her a little bit differently from many of the other assassins out there. So she has pretty high burst damage, not as high as some assassins out there. She does need to put in some auto attacks to catch up with, like an all-in Talon or an all-in Zed. But pretty respectable damage, really high sustained damage. So she can sit there and go toe-to-toe with some tanks. She can, do damage over time because she has pretty low cooldowns on her abilities, and just her auto attacks themselves are very dangerous and do quite a bit of damage once you get a decent chunk of AP. So that, makes her a bit different. She also has a very unusual itemization pathing because she doesn't have to get a lot of mana items. She doesn't have to get Ludens. And a lot of the stuff that is really good on her is very cost efficient and very powerful, and that's rare. A lot of mid laner efficiency on their first couple of items is not that great. Usually they have to get a mana item, either Hextech GLP or Ludens, and then typically they go for double pin with like Sork Boots plus Oblivion Orb. But she actually has some more like unique items. She can get Nashor's Tooth, she can get Raw of the Ages, she can get Proto Belt. So there are a lot of different things she can get that end up being very, very efficient. So we'll hit on that in just a moment. But that is something that makes her different. And the fact that she is tanky for an assassin. So she can actually engage and start fights and dive and get to that back line. Now, it's ideal if someone else starts it, like you're a Leona or a Nautilus on your team. But if no one else can do it and you go Rod of the Ages and Zhonya's Hourglass, you might be able to do it in certain circumstances. So she does have that option because, once again, she can stick in there. She does have some CC with her Moonfall. So she's at least kind of like a follow-up, a pretty good follow-up engager, if nothing else. Okay, now her weaknesses. So she has very limited escapes. So this Lunar Rush has to dash to a target. She cannot just free dash and get away. So that means she's really vulnerable if you position up in the lane. And you can't really harass under tower either. So if someone gets a freeze on you, we'll talk about lane positioning here in a little bit, but if someone gets a freeze on you and just hangs out under their tower, it's going to be extremely difficult for you to last hit because you're going to get ganked by the jungler, or you could get engaged on by them because you can't really trade with them. You have to go in, very close into melee combat, and you don't do a ton of bursts. You can't just like, poke somebody and one-shot them with like, LeBlanc double chain or something like that and kill them, right? She has to, get some autos off. So that's going to put you at a disadvantage if someone does position under tower early on. Now, what you can do to try to counter that is you can try to push in with like your Crescent Strike and then like go roam to a side lane or something like that. So you got to try to punish freezes. It's not going to happen a lot in lower elo brackets. People don't tend to freeze that well. They'll just let it crash into the tower and reset. And that gives you the opportunity to go contest scuttles, get deep wards, roam, all that kind of stuff. So that can be a weakness, particularly in higher elo, and that's why you don't see her a ton in like pro. I keep saying that, but let me see. I know we've seen her some. There was a game, program that I watched the other day. I think it was NA, where I was seeing her a bit more. Yeah, you're not seeing her a ton. She's got 13% presence, so pretty far down the list, but you do see her occasionally close to 50% win rate, 48. So, but that's one of the main things about pro versus solo queue is that she's just really dangerous in the laning phase because, in pro they will freeze you out, they will camp you with the jungler, and it's just really hard to work around that because you don't have an escape. That's the thing with someone like Kassadin or LeBlanc is they can get away once Kassadin gets to 6. They can get away from ganks. So Um, she is going to be vulnerable if they have good wave management. And then she's a melee champion with low sustain, so you can get poked out. That's why I recommend going for the Taste of Blood Ravenous Hunter build with Conquer. We'll talk about that more here in just a little bit. But she can go Rod of the Ages early on, which helps. Once you get that Catalyst, it does help you sort of heal you through the laning phase a bit. But if you're against like a Xerath or a really good Vel'Koz or something like that, then it could be a hard time for you. Especially Xerath. Xerath's just a nightmare because you can't even hide behind the minions. Like, he just casts all of his spells anytime, anywhere. You don't have any dashes. You don't have any mobility, so you're probably just going to get blasted in that matchup. But yeah, the poke champions are going to be kind of rough for you. She's a lot better into other melee champs, I think, in the laning phase, but that is one more thing. And then you're vulnerable to mobility in general. I think you do have some stickiness about you. You know, if you're using your Q into E fairly often, then you can stick to people. But she doesn't have a ton of other slows in her kit outside of her ult. So if someone else, you know, has a lot of dashes or has a lot of mobility or can kite you, if you get like chain CC'd versus like a Leona or a Nautilus or something like that, then you can get kited and killed. So that is sort of a problem. And the fact that you are melee, the fact that you do have to get really close to do most of your damage, right? Like your E requires you to go up close, Moonfall's close, Pale Cascade is close, does mean that you are vulnerable to a lot of AoE stuff. So, you know, you could get dunked in the Jarvan ult, you could get Rumble ulted, you could just eat a bunch of random, like, hits from the Nautilus, right? You could get knocked up by his ult or the Leona. So, you know, that can be kind of rough if they're the ones that are initiating on you and they have all of the CC. That can be a problem for her as well. But overall, you know, like I said, I think she is very powerful, especially in the right circumstances. Okay, so recommended runes and recommended items. So I did look up a bunch of different places for the runes. I looked up a bunch of one tricks that were playing it. I looked up like what was the most successful in terms of win rates on different items. You got to be really careful when you're looking at charts like this, though, because sometimes, you know, you'll see stuff that has a really high success rate, like first item, death cap, or whatever. But the reason that that item has such a high win rate is because if someone's buying death cap first, that means they probably have like 5 kills in the first 10 minutes, right? So it's like really, really circumstantial when you would get that item. Same thing with like death cap second. It's not that that's the best item to rush because statistically it's the highest win rate. It's because you were already stomping the game really hard, and that's a stomp item, pretty much. Or, you know, really weird things like Gunblade. You know, you need to look at that too, because only 69 people rushed that. So it's either people like Diana One Tricks just trying it out or trolling or whatever. But it's such a small sample size, right? Versus the 22,000, you know, that have bought Rod of the Ages that have played her on 10.3 so far. So you always got to take statistics with a grain of salt and really think about the circumstances behind the data and not just look at whatever the highest win rate is and go from there. And you can see kind of in the chart, you know, she does really well early on. She gets up to, you know, 55 and some change win rate at the 20 to 25 minute mark, but then at 30 to 35, she falls off hard. And the main reason for that is, you know, everyone else is going to have a ton of damage. And in those team fights, like I said, you're just going to get hit by a lot of just random collateral stuff. People are just going to have like random ults going off all the time in team fights, and you're just going to eat a lot of that damage. And yes, you do have some tankiness in the early to mid game with your shield, but that's not enough to make it through, you know, the Rumble ult, the Misfortune ult, the Aphelios, you know, Flamethrower ult. All that stuff is still going to roast you later on because you don't get that many defensive items. So this means that you really need to try to snowball and get ahead like a lot of assassins, and try to close out that game, you know, at the 20 to 25 minute mark. And that's going to play into the itemization and sort of what's changing about that I've noticed over the last few weeks or so. Pros have been shifting more towards Proto Bout and dropping the Rod of the Ages. We'll talk about that here in a second. But it's always nice to kind of look at these and put that story together like I'm doing. It's like, okay, why are they shifting? Who's doing this? Why are they doing that? So I did a lot of looking for you and researching some of these different builds. You know, I saw what was working, what wasn't working for a lot of the Diana One Tricks out there. This was the highest rated person. If you just went to something like u.gg and looked at pro builds here, like this is cool. It shows you stuff, but it's a lot of arc second. Like it doesn't show you everybody who's a one trick. And I know he's a really popular, I don't remember if he's EU or NA. But he's really popular. But you see, like, a ton of this is Arc second. So it's skewing it very heavily towards his favorite build. So it looks like everyone's getting Rod of the Ages, right? But if you look at a more diverse set of champions, there are more and more people, especially recently, that are going for this Proto Belt. So you can see Faker's going for Proto Belt here. T's going for Proto Belt. And some of these, like, one-trick champions, Suntail. And these are really, like, you want to look at the one-tricks a lot of times, too, because, often they will know. And Arc second is a one-trick, I'm pretty sure, of Diana as well. But, they're going to know a lot about that champion, a lot more than someone like Faker is. As good as Faker is and as, amazing as he is, the challenger one-trick type of people are going to be, they're going to know what's up. Now, you do have to keep in mind that when you look at someone like a challenger or someone like Faker, definitely, they're playing in a very different meta from someone who's like, silver trying to play Diana, right? Like, things like lane dominance matters a lot more. Things like item break points and back timings matter a lot more. So there's just some things that are just much, much more important in Challenger than they are in Silver. So I think the mistake is to believe that, that's an amazing player. It's one of the best Diana players in the world. So I need to copy and do exactly what they do, no questions asked. Where you really want to be asking questions. You want to think, okay, in my Silver game, do I want to go for something that's going to be like ultra lane dominant if I don't feel comfortable dominating that hard, or if I can't really like take over the game in the first couple of minutes because I'm not a Smurf or whatever? If you're thinking that, then maybe you go for something that scales a little better, like the Rod of the Ages, right? If you're like, I don't think my team's going to be able to close it out by 25 minutes, so maybe I should go for Rod of the Ages. So that can influence decisions that you're making. So don't just automatically look at challengers and super high elo people and just do exactly what they do, no questions asked. It's a good place to start because obviously they're very smart and they're making the right choices, almost certainly, for their elo bracket and their play style. But you just want to think, are there times when I might need to adjust it for my play style? So, anyways, I think the runes that I've seen on the most players that I think is probably the best, especially, for kind of the mid-elo stuff, the silvers, the golds, and even lower than that, I think is going to be the Conqueror build, and this is really popular. There are some people, like you can see, he's switching it up. That's another thing, is these high-elo people, especially the one-tricks, they're going to switch a lot depending on the situation. And if you don't really understand, like, the situation, which you probably won't unless you're really high-elo one-tricking the champion, you won't grasp it fully, then it can be very confusing. Like, well, why is he taking Electrocute here, and why is he taking Conquer here? It could just depend on different matchups. But the Electrocute is going to give you higher burst if you go for that. But it's going to give you a lot lower sustained damage over time. So part of that is going to be, is it going to be a longer game? Are you going to be facing tanks and things like that? Then Conquer is going to be better. So if he's against an Ornn here, or he's against a Silas and a Set, it's going to take a while to hack through those people. So that's probably why he wants a bit more damage. But here, he's got Electrocute, and that's going to be good against Rumble. And I guess you probably want the burst against Olaf too. You don't want long fights with him. There's the Set there. And then here, this is a little more questionable. That's why I'm saying sometimes, even as someone who, I'm not an expert, I don't play Diana a ton, it's hard for me to understand why he would want... I guess it makes sense why he would want Electrocute here. It is going to be a longer fight because you're against a Soraka, so that's kind of weird probably, but an Echo's going to force a longer fight too, so I'm not really sure on that one. It's possible they just try out different stuff too, or maybe they forget to switch their runes. Maybe they're, some things can just be accidental as well. But the runes that I've seen the most useful, I like Conquer the best. The big reason that Conquer is really nice is that it's very versatile. It's great for long fights because you get those stacks built up. And typically fights, team fights can go a bit longer in lower elo brackets because people won't close out the game as quickly. People are going to get more items. People are going to miss skill shots and not optimize their CC chains and things like that. So I think that fights tend to go a bit longer. And you get that extra sustain, the 15% off of all damage that you do. And I think Rod of the Ages probably at lower elos is where you want to be as well. So the more survivability that you have, the better that something like Conquer is going to be, potentially, because you're going to have more time to get more lifesteal off, to build those stacks up, and to just put out higher sustained damage. So I would recommend Conquer in most situations. And then the other one that I really like a lot is Presence of Mind. Now, I've tried this rune out on a bunch of different champions, and it's actually very, very nice to have that ton of extra mana that you get. It's like 650 extra gold worth of flat mana. That does open you up if you want to take something like Proto Belt, which we'll talk about the difference in those items here in just a second. If you do want to take Proto Belt, then I think that Presence of Mind is almost mandatory, because then you're not going to have a mana item. You're going to have Proto Belt plus Nashers, and neither one of those has any mana. So you almost certainly want Presence there. Triumph is the other option that's pretty good. Whenever you get a kill, it does give you back some health. It does give you back some, or give you some extra gold on kills and assists. So that's handy. But I don't know. In longer fights where you're getting the resets, Triumph can be pretty good, but Presence resets the mana. Now, she doesn't have a huge amount of mana problems, per se. Like, a lot of her stuff is very cheap. You know, the Crescent Strike is 50 mana at all ranks. Pale Cascade, when you rank that up, is only 60 mana. Lunar Rush is 60. This is 100. So it's not like you're going to be churning through a ton of mana, but, you know, once again, you're not getting a lot of mana items either, because you pretty much always want a Nashor's Tooth. And so you're really only going to get one mana item with Rod of the Ages. And if it's solo queue, you know you're not going to be getting that blue buff off the jungler most of the time. I mean, there could be like, like an 0-5 Rek'Sai jungle or something like that, and she's still going to want that blue buff, or she's going to AFK instead of giving it to you as the 5-0 Diana mid. If you're in silver. So, I don't know. I like Presence, but I can definitely see an argument for Triumph. It's kind of split on the one tricks. They do different stuff depending on different situations from what I've seen. So this person's going Presence, but, maybe he goes Triumph some other times. Now, he does get Taste of Blood and Ravenous Hunter, and this is what I recommend for secondaries as well. And I think if you have those, like if you have Ravenous Hunter especially, and Conquer fully stacked, you probably don't need Presence. It's going to be a little bit of overkill in the healing. Like, the Triumph is nice, but just making sure you have enough mana in these long extended fights where you can just keep cranking out your spells, I think is going to be more important, because your spells ultimately are going to give you more health, both with Ravenous Hunter and Conquer, and then if you go for Rod of the Ages with the Eternity passive, which we'll talk about here in a second, that's going to give you like a pretty good flow of health. So if you're not sure, I would take Presence, but Triumph could be okay. And then it comes down to Alacrity versus Tenacity. So if they have a bunch of CC, then you might want to go Tenacity. So if you're against like a Lysandra in the mid lane, now don't forget Tenacity does not reduce suppression. So if they have a Malzahar, there's no point in getting the Tenacity to try to stop his ult, because it's not going to reduce it at all. That's how Tenacity, or that's how suppression works. Nothing reduces it. But against a lot of different forms of CC, then, maybe you do have to go Legend Tenacity. Especially if they have a ton of CC on their team. They've got like an Ornn. It's not going to reduce the knockup, though, on Ornn, so keep that in mind. Or like a Nautilus. Doesn't reduce the Nautilus knockup. Leona. So if they have a lot of CC, you might want to consider doing Legend Tenacity. You can also pick up Merc Treads in some situations, especially if you're behind or they have like a heavy CC comp or a heavy magic damage comp. You could consider Mercury Treads, but I think if you're not sure, just err on the side of Alacrity. She does gain a lot of benefit out of attack speed, especially with her passive and with Nashor's Tooth. So that would be what I would consider. And then Coup de Grace, I'd take most of the time. There are some people, I've seen that get like Last Stand, but I think most of the time you just want Coup de Grace, just be able to execute people that are lower health. It's pretty standard. And then the other set of runes that I think is good, Ravenous Hunter is amazing. This is going to help get you through the early game too if you're getting poked out. And then it scales really well later on into the game. Also, especially with kind of a lot of your AoE abilities. Now, it does get reduced on the AoE stuff, but getting a lot of stacks of this, once this is fully stacked, that's going to give you, I think, 14% extra spell vamp. So that's really nice. Now, that does apply to your passive damage as well. Your auto attacks do not trigger it, but the passive damage off of your, like every third hit will give you extra sustain on that also. So I think it's just really good, especially for those longer fights that we're talking about. It's just going to give you a ton of extra sustain. And then Taste of Blood early on, even if you hit somebody just with your Q, just poking them out, it's kind of a tough lane, then that will still give you some sustain. So Taste of Blood doesn't look insane on the surface, but that amount of healing really does add up over time, especially in the laning phase. So that's pretty good. I don't think you want any of these other like zombie wards. You could make an argument maybe for sudden impact. It does give you 6 pin for 5 seconds, and you can, in longer fights, you can dash every like 4 seconds with your E. So you could potentially have this almost permanently up. The extra lethality is nice because you are auto attacking too, and your autos do physical damage. So, I could see an argument maybe for sudden impact, but I haven't seen that many people doing it. I'd probably just go for the laning phase Taste of Blood. Other options that other people have gone, you see several people going for the Revitalize secondary, so like Arc Seconds going Revitalize. And I've seen a bunch of different variations of this. If they have an all-in lane in mid, you can go for Bone Plating. That can help you out if you're like against a Zed or something like that. The problem is this can get poked out, and it has a 45-second cooldown, and people know this a lot of times, so they can just hit you with some piece of poke to start with, and then just wait for this to fall off. So, I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of Bone Plating. If you're initiating the fight, and if they don't have a lot of poke, then Bone Plating can work, but I think a lot of mid laners are going to have poke, so it's a little questionable to me. Shield Bash is nice. You have a repeatable shield with your W on a fairly low cooldown, but the damage, it only applies once whenever you auto attack somebody. It's not really that much damage. It does scale with bonus health, so, with your Rod of the Ages, it can be nice. You can get a pretty big shield as well, but realistically, I guess this can hit for maybe in the mid game, like 30 or so after all the bonuses, maybe more than that, maybe 40, maybe 50. So, it can add up. And it doesn't have a cooldown. So I guess, you can throw your shield up. So every 5 seconds, if you're doing like 40 more damage in a fight, especially in a longer fight, I guess that can be pretty good. And it does give you the extra, 5 armor and 5 magic resist in the mid game. So I guess that's a pretty decent little rune. You wouldn't probably want to go conditioning. Second Wind does give you some sustain over time. I think Ravenous Hunter is going to give you a lot more, especially later in the game. But this can help sustain you early on against poke. And I've seen some people do like Revitalize would help you out with your shield. So that can be very useful. I've seen a couple people do Overgrowth. I'm not totally sold on that. I think that takes way too long to stack up. But that would help you against all-ins, people that are trying to blow you up, your Zeds, your Talons, things like that. Maybe that's a little bit more useful. But, these are okay. They're definitely viable. But I still think that just Ravenous Hunter, especially later on in the game with Conquer, with how much sustained damage that you deal, I think is the place that you want to be. What did Faker end up going? Faker's doing something else weird. He's going Biscuit Delivery, and he started Corrupting Pot with Time Warp Tonic, which is pretty advanced. You have to be able to trade properly and know like your exact all-ins to make good use of Corrupting Potion. So I wouldn't recommend that for most people, but it could work. Did Time Warp... okay, it does work with Biscuits. I was about to say it doesn't work with Corrupting Potion anymore. They nerfed that a while back. Yeah, it's okay. Obviously, Faker, very good player. And he just rushed Proto Belt. But, yeah, let's talk about the items real quick. So the runes, kind of up in the air. I think, most of what I saw, it's almost always Conquer or Electrocute. I prefer Conquer. I just think it's safer, especially while you're learning the champion in those longer fights. And it has a lot of really good secondaries. Either Presence or Triumph's really good. Alacrity is a very, very strong rune. Coup de Grace serviceable. And then Ravenous and Taste of Blood are both pretty solid. Okay. Let's talk about the items. So she does have a lot of different items that you can get. Kind of the standard build is going to be Rod of the Ages into Nashers. And that's a very, very efficient item. So if you get this item early on, if you get this around like 10 or 11 minutes, which should be doable if you get like 1 kill or if you farm like really well early on. It's only 2,600 gold. A lot of the early items for mini champions are going to be about 3,200 gold, so like Luden's Echo and things like that. So you can come online with this earlier on. The thing about Rod, though, is you can't really punish like that hard once you get it because, I mean, it does give you some power up, but it's not like boom, like really powerful active, or other type of ability like Luden's. I guess is not an active, but it's not like that boom, like crisp, like massive power spike as soon as you complete it, because it does take 10 minutes to charge up. But in those longer games, this can be really solid, and this allows you to serve almost like an off tank with your shield plus Rod of the Ages. Then you have Ravenous Hunter and Conquer. It's going to be pretty hard to crack through you, in a longer fight, especially if you have any sort of healing or shielding from your supports or other champions. You got that Soraka top lane that's really popular right now. You can serve as an off tank, so it's going to be hard to just like 1v5 dive into everybody unless you're like ultra fed. You could also get Hourglass pretty quickly on her if you need to, but this does allow you to be like an off tank sort of option. And it does give you that sustain. So once you get that catalyst for 1100, that's going to give you the extra health off of the eternity, extra health and extra mana. Every time you cast an ability, you restore mana equal to 15% of the damage taken from champions, and you restore health equal to 20% of the mana you spend, up to 15 per cast. I thought it used to. Did they change that? Maybe they moved that over to Lost Chapter, where you get that like mana that ticks up over time. I thought this used to give you health that ticks up over time, and that was probably years and years and years ago at this point. Like I said, I don't play a ton of okay, yeah, they removed that back in season 6. Leveling up restores 150 health and 200 mana. So they basically moved that over to just the mana portion over to Lost Chapter. Okay. But nevertheless, like, this is still going to be pretty good, right? If you churn through most of your mana pool, if you have like 1,000 mana, when you get your catalyst in the early to mid game, you might even have a bit more than that. Especially if you have Presence of Mind, you're going to have more than that. Then if you spend all of your mana, then it's eventually going to give you like an extra 200 HP. So still going to be pretty solid, help you sustain through that laning phase, give you some more mana and health to go with it. So Rod's very good, and as you can see, it's super efficient as well. It gives you up to 156% extra gold efficiency once you complete it. A lot of items are going to be, somewhere in the neighborhood of like 90%. So if you look at Morellonomicon, which is pretty popular, it's only 92% efficient. Look at Rylai's, that one's going to be 106% efficient. So once you start talking about items, coming in, clocking in at 150% efficiency, especially offensive items, that's going to be very, very strong. So Rod is what most people get. It's good, especially if you are learning Diana and you're not very good at pressing your advantage and taking over the game. 1v9 in the early game if you're not smurfing. If your team doesn't have really crisp coordination, if you're not like, getting priority mid and like trying to contest Scuttle immediately and rotating top at 8 minutes to contest like the Rift spawn and lane swapping and doing all this stuff that you're seeing in Pro right now, Rod's just going to be like the best sort of just do it and just kind of work your way through the game. And I'll go ahead and mention Proto Belt here because this is what a lot of people have been shifting to lately, that I saw a lot of the one tricks are shifting over to this. If you are a lot more comfortable with Diana, then you can start getting Proto Belt early on. And the main reason you would do this is it gives you an immediate power spike. You don't have to wait on those 10 minutes. So if you look at this, it is less efficient. It's only 94% efficient, but that's without the active. And this is kind of hard to quantify, but it gives you a good chunk of extra burst. So it's only going to have 60 ability power. So early on, that's going to be the same as Rod of the Ages. Rod does charge up to 100 over time. But like immediately when you get this, it's the same ability power. It does give you 10% cooldown. So it's going to allow you to get more ultimates, use more E's in fights. It does give you the 300 health, which is also similar to Rod of the Ages early on. So it has a very similar power profile once Rod gets completed. It obviously doesn't have the mana on it, but then again, as we said, her mana costs are pretty low. And especially if you're taking Presence of Mind, you're getting the extra 500 mana off of kills and assists. And you're getting the 20% mana refund on a killer and assist as well, then you may not need the mana off of Rod. And if you don't need the mana off of Rod, then that mana accounts for a lot, right? Like the extra 400 mana is 560 gold value. So that's probably going to drop this down to like 120 or 130% gold efficient if you don't need the mana. Now, mana is obviously, you know, you want it if it's free, but it does come at the opportunity cost of not having that early game power. So this is very nice because it does allow you to close the gaps. You can keep auto attacking on people, and it does a pretty good amount of burst damage. I mean, if you hit someone in the face with this, it ends up doing like almost twice the damage. It's not quite twice, but like at level 7, if you do this, it's probably going to do like 190 damage or something like that, which is quite a bit when you're trying to all in and burst somebody out. And the fact that you can dive right in their face and use the Proto Belt to hit them with pretty much every bolt, it only does 10% for each bolt beyond the first that hits them, but on your way and behind you, fire a Nova of 7 bolts. So it does 170%. 90% reduction on each additional bolt. That's a 40-second cooldown. So you can trigger this very often for trades, right? Like you can hit someone with a Q, activate your shield, dash in. You know, you're going to explode it on them with all the shield stuff, Proto Belt them in the face. You know, that's going to do a good amount of burst. If you get this, you complete this item by like, you know, level 6 or whatever, that's going to be an extra, you know, 150 damage. And then you can ult him, and that does a ton of damage. So adding an extra 150 like burst damage early on can get you snowballing, can get you rolling. And it allows you to keep sticking to them. So you can dash in, you know, once, and then if they flash or dash out, you can use that Proto Belt to get even closer and maybe get in one more auto attack. So Proto Belt is very good. It's going to get outscaled later on, though. You know, Rod is going to, you know, go up to 100 ability power. It's going to go up to 500 health. And it's going to have that more sustain, you know, with the Aeon or whatever Eternity passive. It's going to have more sustain over time. But this does give you the burst. So if you are, you know, very familiar with Diana, if you do think you can snowball, if you can take advantage of different power windows early on, you know, contest, get those early dragons, get those scuttles, get an extra kill or two, get priority in your lane. Now that is nice too, in that I believe this does against champions and monsters. Okay, so it is going to do reduced damage to monsters, but that's if each bolt hits a different monster. I hadn't even thought of that until right now, but that could give you a lot of extra wave clear as well, right? So if you just like Proto Belt into the wave just to push it, you like use your Q, Proto Belt it, and then activate your W, you probably clear out that wave really quickly, and that can give you some great priority for back timing or rotating down to bot lane. So that could be a really, really good wave clear thing too. So it does extra damage if the same minion gets hit, I believe, against champions and monsters each instant beyond the first. But if you hit different monsters with it, it'll still deal full damage. So that could actually be quite good. So that's what, like I said, a lot of the top end people are doing. That's not what most people are doing. Most people are still doing Rod, as you can see. But more and more people are starting to try the Proto Belt out a little bit. Their overall win rates are very similar. So it's just pretty much like Proto Belt. You're saying, I'm all in on the early game. I want to try to win this game by 20 to 25 minutes, which makes sense given this chart. So that's why a lot of people are doing the Proto Belt, to just double down on her really strong moments, right? Which are the first 25 minutes of the game. But like I said, Rod, it's a lot safer, especially if you have to be the primary tank. If no one else on your team picked the tank champion, or it's just going to take a long time to kill them. They have an Ornn on their team and a Soraka or something like that. It's going to take a while to hack through them. You know, maybe maybe Rod. Now, Nasher is another one, and I have seen some people just straight building Nashers. And just like skipping the Rod and skipping the Hourglass, just going straight into Nashers and then doing something like a Zonya's Hourglass after that. Nashers is also super efficient. It used to be 2,900 gold. They did bump it up to 3,000, but it's still a fantastic bargain. It's 140% just when you get it by itself. And then every 100 ability power that you have beyond that does an extra 12.5%. So the reason that this item is so efficient is that there are very, very few champions that actually use this item because it's such a weird collection of stats. So 80 ability power, obviously going to be good. 50% attack speed, that's going to be very strong with your passive. And then you also have the 20% cooldown reduction, which is great because remember that's going to fuel your mobility in fights also, because that means you're going to get more Qs off, which means you can get more E's off and stick to people. So not only is it just a flat amount more damage, but it gives you a ton more mobility too whenever you get CDR. That is one nice thing about Proto Belt too, is you get the 10% CDR, and Rod doesn't have any CDR on it. And then you get the extra damage on hits. This is something that no matter what you're doing, this is your core item. Usually it's second. It's either Proto Belt into Nashers or it's Rod into Nashers. It doesn't, like, Nashers doesn't do as much burst as Proto Belt does right off the bat because a lot of its power is in its attack speed. It doesn't have the, proto thing to it, the little bolts or whatever. And it's more expensive. It's 500 more gold. But nevertheless, it's still really good. A major thing about this that's really handy too is this works to do a ton of damage to towers. Like Proto Belt doesn't do a lot of extra damage to towers, obviously. Neither does Rod. But the fact that you have all of this extra attack speed is going to do a lot of extra damage to towers, dragons, things like that, blue buffs, Baron. Just anything that's going to take a while to cut through, tanks. So Nashor's Tooth is definitely a really good item, and usually it's either your first item or your second item. If you think you're going to want to go like a Zanya's Hourglass, if you're against something like a Talon or a Zed, you can do like an Arm Guard early on, maybe even get a Stopwatch early on, and then after that you can go to Nashor's and then complete the Zanyas later on. So typically if you go for a Zanya's build, you'll get your Nashor's somewhere in there, first or second, and then you'll skip both the Rod and the Proto Belt and just go like... Zanya's Hourglass into Nashor's into something like Deathcap. Okay. Because if you're not, like, you always want to go Rod first if you're going Rod. If you do not get Rod as first item, you got to skip it and go for something else. Because otherwise it's just going to take too long to come online. Okay, so Nashor's core item. You got to get this. It's fantastic. Everybody gets this item. It's extremely good on Diana. It's one of the main reasons to play her. Hourglass, very good on Diana as well. The extra defense is really good with her shield because the shield benefits from the armor. Talk about this a lot in support videos, but if you have a 100 shield and you have 100 armor, then it's going to take 200 physical damage to break that shield. Every point of armor that you get means that it takes 1% more damage to kill you or to reduce the health of somebody. Right, and that applies to shields as well. So when you're getting something like 50 armor or whatever it is off of Hourglass, I don't know if I have that up here. But let's just say that you get 50 armor off of Hourglass, you get a 300 shield off of your W. That means it's going to take 450 physical damage to cut through that shield, and then they have to cut through all of your HP with that armor too. And there are quite a few... physical damage dealers in the meta right now. There are even several that you're seeing in the mid lane. You still got your Talons, your Zeds, things like that, Yasuo. So that does make Hourglass pretty good. Also, she, I guess I can just pull it through here. That'll probably get us where we want to be. There we go. Also, she benefits from this invulnerability really well because she has low cooldown ults. So sometimes you might just need a couple more seconds just to wait on your Q to come off cooldown so that you can Q again and then get a double dash to finish somebody off. So typically people that are really good with Zanyas have fairly low cooldowns and like some kind of burst or mobility that comes like right after the Hourglass. So something like a Fizz will get an Hourglass because that might buy him enough time to get one more jump off with his Trident. Someone like Echo might do Hourglass. That'll buy enough time for his little like shield thing to come in so that he can get the stun and the shield on people. Same thing with Diana. Like that buys her more time for her to get her Q off. It buys time for everybody to get hit with her ultimate so she can like start a fight, go in, Q, shield, E onto somebody, press her ultimate, pull all three people in, and then if she thinks she's going to get bursted out, she can just Hourglass, wait on everyone to get smashed by the ult, and then clean it up after that. Right, so she has several things that make it pretty good for her, on top of the fact that she really, really likes that defense because she has a spammable shield and she's going to take a lot of sustain with Ravenous Hunter and Conquer. So that's going to be really solid. And then typically she likes Death Cap also later on. You'll notice she often doesn't get Morellonomicon. You can get that if they have a bunch of anti-healing on their team. But usually with champions that have some sort of shield, you'd much rather have flat AP rather than pen. And the reason is penetration doesn't affect her shield, right? Like if you get spell pen in your budget, then it's not going to give you any extra shield. It'll affect the damage that you do off of this, but it doesn't affect the shield itself. And she does have really high AP ratios when you think about, you know, the different combinations of all of her abilities. So that's why you typically want to go for something like a Death Cap versus a like a Morellonomicon or a Void Staff. If they have a ton of magic resist, obviously you might have to get Void Staff. But in general, this is why you'll see Rabadons on people like Diana, or Rabadon's on people like Echo, because he has that huge shield as well, and he has his ultimate, which gains a lot from AP as well. So anytime, just in general, a good rule of thumb, if you're not sure if a champion has a shield and it's an AP damage champ, then you're gonna want to get flat AP, something like a Rabadon's Death Cap rather than Spell Pen. Versus if they have really high base damages but don't scale that well with AP, or they have some kind of passive or something that does a lot of extra AP damage, like a Brand or a Zyra, then you're gonna want Spell Pen. Okay. Now, last couple of minutes here. We're pretty much out of time. We're gonna go over time, but there's probably not gonna be a lot of people watching this video anyway, so we'll just we'll give the few chosen ones that decide to go in here and look in depth about Diana a few more minutes. Okay, so as far as positioning in the lane goes, your ideal position in a lot of circumstances, especially early on, is you want to try to freeze near your tower because you don't have those escapes. You need to play defensively. That's how it is with a lot of defensive champs. So you want to try to like keep the minions. I don't know why it's like, there we go. Keep the minions like right here if you can, and just last hit them. And if you're wondering like, well, how do you freeze? I have a whole video on lane management you can watch in the channel. But pretty much, you need to try to keep, when they're attacking you, or when they're attacking their minion wave, you want to try to have them keep like 1 or 2 extra minions on top of yours, and then try to freeze it out right here. And as it gets closer, that's when you start attacking. Use your Q, use your W, try to get those last hits. And you want to try to freeze it here. And the big reason there is you have your tower as defense, so it's going to be really hard to dive you, potentially, and you might just be able to last hit here and be relatively safe. Because you don't have great gank assist until you get your ult, because you have no CC without your ult. So it's going to be hard for the enemy to gank, or your ally jungler to gank and kill. It depends on who they're playing, but you don't have great gank assist. And you're really, really vulnerable. Like we mentioned before, if they manage to get you up here like this and they do that to you, so let's say that, you know, the minion wave's here or whatever, and they do this to you and you have to walk up here, it's going to be extremely dangerous for you because you don't have any sort of mobility to get away from ganks, right? So if their jungler, you know, comes up here and comes around and ganks you, you're probably dead. You're going to have to burn your flash. You're going to die. So it's going to make it extremely vulnerable. Or if their mid laner has some kind of engage on you and wants to chase you down, so it's like a LeBlanc or something like that, who wants to jump on you and get a chase, or like a Katarina or something, it's going to be really hard to deal with that. So, you know, the best thing to do in that case, if they're letting you push into them, is you want to try to keep pushing. Protobelt does help with this. It does help break freezes. And use your Q as well to break a freeze if you go for that, and then, you know, try to rotate down here and make a play. So, you know, check out your other lane, see what's going on. If your bot lane is getting pushed in, especially once you hit level 6, then you could try for this. You could try to push up with like Protobelt and your Q or whatever, and then rotate down here and see if you can get that play. You can ask for wards, like, you know, do they have any wards down here? Try to like keep up and look yourself to see, but just keep coming down. Even if this is warded, especially at lower elo brackets, you can just try to run through it and just gank them anyways, because a lot of people just will tunnel vision and not even like spot you on the wards. So that's one option you can do. If they have another melee champ and you are able to all in and kill them potentially, you can try that. And if you do snowball and get those kills, then you can, start trying to get scuttle, getting dragons, things like that. But if you're against a ranged champion, I think it's going to be difficult a lot of times to kill them in the early game because they're probably going to be able to reposition around you. But it just depends on how strong you are with the Diana. But in general, if you're really confident, you want to keep it like right here so that you can engage and kill them. Keep it in the middle. You might be able to back up and still get away from a gank, perhaps. If you're still learning Diana, or if they have a very scary early game jungler, they have an Elise or a Lee Sin or whatever, I would really try to take that defensive position. Or if they have like a very good early game bully that's going to pressure you off, then you want to stand back a little bit too. Some weird stuff can be pretty good against Diana also. So things like if you're seeing Set in the middle, or just like strange stuff like Mordekaiser or Garen, like other things that are going to be Darius. I think those could be pretty good against Diana as well. Those are kind of rare, but like I said, I'm not going to know the individual matchups like a ton. I'm not a Diana expert. I can just kind of walk you through the theories of, different items and runes, like basic lane management and what you want to do. But, yeah, I mean, I think that's just it. Try to push up if you think you have a chance of getting the scuttle or making some plays bottom. Otherwise, just hang out at your tower. It's kind of up to you if you want to take teleport or ignite. If you think you have a lot of kill pressure, take ignite, but you're really gonna you're not gonna be able to split push later on if you don't take teleport. If you do take teleport, it depends on who you think they're gonna be splitting with. If you think you can potentially beat their splitter if you get ahead, then I would take teleport so that you can work a side lane, because she does take towers really quickly with Nashers. So if they have like a Diana or something, not a Diana, like an Irelia or something on the enemy team, and you think you're going to be able to potentially outplay and beat her later on, then you could try to take teleport for splitting. That does also help you if you think your side lanes are going to get pushed in. You could like teleport to wards and potentially get some flanks and kills. So I like teleport a lot. The higher up the elo goes, the more likely it is that you're going to like want to take teleport. But especially if you're in lower elo brackets and you just want to go for those kills with ignite, I think ignite's still fine. So that's kind of up to you. But anyways, okay, that's going to be it for this video. Thank you very much. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I don't want to go too long. I know we're over an hour. That's going to scare off everybody, but hopefully you learned a couple of things about Diana. Like I said, I did the best that I can without being a mid main or a Diana main. I did some research, looked up some other people, did some theory crafting. So hopefully that gives you some ideas about not only just like what to play and when to play it, but just thinking about Diana, like why some of these people are building some of these items. Why are they getting certain runes? Which situations might you want to do different things? So hopefully I walked you through some scenarios. You can try them out. Find out what works best for you. Let us know in the comments. And otherwise, that's going to be it. Have a good day. We'll see you next time.